You know what destroys good people? It is not hate. It is not betrayal. It is the moment they realize they were loved only for what they tolerated. And the terrifying part is most kind people notice it very late, way too late. They keep giving and giving and giving, hoping somebody will finally say, "Thank you for bleeding for me." But people get used to your suffering. That is the ugly truth. If you forgive too fast, they hurt you faster next time. If you answer every call, they stop respecting your time. If you stay soft with cruel people, they do not admire your heart. They study it like wolves studying an open wound. Some of you were trained to feel guilty for saying no, so you smile while dying inside. You help while exhausted. You stay loyal to people who secretly enjoy watching you break. And then one night you sit alone in silence, wondering why nobody saves you the way you save everyone else. Because the world noticed something before you did. You made yourself available for everyone. And people rarely protect what is always easy to reach. There are hearts so pure they apologize after being destroyed. Can you imagine that? Sorry for feeling pain. Pathetic. No, not pathetic. Just wounded. Deeply wounded. But eventually, even the kindest soul learns a terrifying lesson. Mercy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You know what happens after years of being emotionally available to everyone? Your nervous system stops feeling safe. You start apologizing for things that were never your fault. You overthink small changes in people's voices. You panic when someone becomes distant because deep inside you became addicted to keeping people comfortable even if it destroys you. That is not kindness anymore. That is fear wearing kindness as a mask. Some people were never loyal to you. They were only loyal to your usefulness, your attention, your emotional labor, your constant presence. And once you stop giving those things, watch how fast their love disappears. Painful, isn't it? To realize you were treasured like a tool, not a soul. I have seen exhausted people still answering messages while crying alone, still helping others while secretly falling apart, still saying it's okay when their chest feels heavy every single night. Nobody talks enough about the anger kind people carry. Oh, it exists. Quiet, hidden, dangerous. Because every swallowed emotion stays somewhere inside the body. Every forced smile, every humiliation you tolerated to keep the peace. Every moment you betrayed yourself just to avoid losing someone. And one day the soul snaps quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. It simply stops caring the same way. Is that why some people suddenly become distant? Not because they turned evil, but because their heart finally became tired of begging for basic respect. You cannot heal in places where you must constantly abandon yourself to be accepted. Remember that the world teaches harsh lessons, and one of the harshest is this: if you never protect your kindness, people will consume it until there is nothing left of you. And do you know what is truly tragic? Some people notice your exhaustion and still ask for more. More patience, more understanding, more chances, more pieces of your soul. As if your heart exists only to absorb damage quietly. That is why emotionally tired people become silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because explaining pain to selfish people feels humiliating. After a while, you start seeing patterns. Who only comes back when lonely? Who disappears when you need help? Who enjoys your warmth but never protects your feelings? And suddenly the loneliness becomes different, heavier, more mature. You realize you were surrounded by people yet emotionally abandoned for years. What a cruel little joke. The person who comforted everyone had nobody to collapse into. Listen carefully. Kindness is beautiful. Mercy is beautiful. A soft heart is beautiful. But when you allow people to repeatedly disrespect you in the name of being good, you slowly teach them that your pain has no consequences. And most human beings, continue behavior that costs them nothing. That is why boundaries matter. Not to hurt others, to protect what is left of you. Because the truth is a constantly wounded heart eventually changes its personality to survive. It becomes quieter, colder, harder to reach. Not because it stopped loving, but because it finally understood love without self-respect becomes self-betrayal. So if your soul feels tired lately, if your chest feels heavy around certain people, if your kindness feels more like exhaustion than peace, maybe your heart is not asking you to give more. Maybe it is begging you to finally protect it. There are people who will watch your spirit fade and still accuse you of changing because they benefited from the version of you that never complained. The version that tolerated everything. The version that kept bleeding quietly just to keep relationships alive. But healing changes people. Pain changes people. Repeated disappointment changes people, especially the kind ones. Because kind people do not break immediately. No. They endure and endure and endure until one small moment finally destroys something inside them forever. Not a huge betrayal. Sometimes just another unanswered message, another humiliation disguised as a joke, another moment of feeling emotionally invisible. And suddenly their soul cannot carry it anymore. Funny thing about emotional pain, people only respect it after your personality changes. Not while you were silently suffering. Not while you were begging privately for understanding. No, only after your warmth disappears. Then they panic. Then they ask, what happened to you? What happened? You got tired. That is what happened. Tired of shrinking yourself so others could feel powerful. Tired of being emotionally mature with emotionally careless people. Tired of calling self-neglect love. Some of you were never too emotional. You were simply carrying too much for too long without support. And eventually, the body reacts, the mind reacts, the heart reacts. You stop laughing the same, stop trusting the same, stop speaking with the same softness in your voice. Because suffering quietly changes the nervous system of a human being. It makes them alert, guarded, suspicious of warmth. But listen carefully. Protecting yourself is not becoming cruel. Learning distance is not hatred. And saying enough does not make you evil. It makes you aware. Aware that your soul also deserves loyalty. Your peace also deserves protection. And your heart was never created to be everybody's emotional sacrifice. You know what kind people do after being hurt too many times? They become experts at hiding emotional damage. They laugh normally, speak normally, go outside normally, while carrying wars inside their chest that nobody can hear. And the terrifying part is most people around them never notice. Because kind snorts, people were trained to suffer gracefully, to remain polite while breaking, to remain calm while disrespected, to remain available while emotionally starving. And after years of this, their body starts feeling heavy. Their sleep changes. Their silence becomes deeper. Even happiness starts feeling exhausting because the soul was never designed to endlessly tolerate emotional disappointment. Some of you confuse self-sacrifice with love. You think enduring pain proves loyalty. You think accepting disrespect makes you mature. No. It only teaches people that your boundaries can be ignored without consequences. And humans repeat what benefits them. That is why selfish people become strangely comfortable around endlessly forgiving hearts. They know you will stay after the apology, stay after the lies, stay after the emotional neglect. And once somebody becomes too sure you will never leave, they stop fearing your absence. That is where the disrespect begins growing quietly. Not all at once, slowly, subtly, a colder tone, less effort, longer silence, less empathy when you are hurting. Until one day you look around and realize you built a home inside people who never intended to protect you emotionally. What a horrifying realization to discover you were fighting for connections that survived only because you kept abandoning yourself. And the saddest part, some of you still blame yourselves for being mistreated. You replay conversations at night, wondering if maybe you were too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. No, you were simply asking emotionally unavailable people for genuine care. And that almost always ends painfully. There comes a stage in emotional exhaustion where the heart stops reacting loudly. No more begging, no more dramatic arguments, no more chasing, just silence. Cold silence. Not because the love disappeared, but because the soul finally became too tired to keep humiliating itself for attention. I think some of the saddest humans alive are those who spent years trying to become easier to love, smaller, quieter, more patient, more understanding. All so people would stop leaving them. But cruel people do not stay because you suffer for them. They stay only while benefiting from you. That is the truth nobody wants to accept. And eventually the kind person changes. Not into a monster, not into a villain, just someone harder to reach emotionally. Someone who thinks twice before opening their heart. Someone who notices manipulation faster. Someone who no longer romanticizes being emotionally exhausted for others, because pain matures people in ugly ways. You start understanding that constant access to you is a privilege, not a right. That your peace matters too. That your time matters too. That your emotional energy is not public property. And suddenly you stop answering immediately. Stop over-explaining. Stop trying to rescue everybody. You become quieter, more observant, more protective of your inner world. And people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, they call this coldness. Of course they do. Boundaries feel offensive to people who enjoyed unlimited access to your soul. But deep down, you know the truth. You were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong people. The wrong people will make your kindness feel embarrassing. The wrong people will make your loyalty feel foolish. The wrong people will drain your spirit, then complain that you changed afterward. So listen carefully now. Protect your softness. Protect your peace. Protect the part of you that still wants to love sincerely. Because this world can turn gentle hearts into emotionally numb ghosts if they are not careful. And sometimes the strongest thing a wounded soul can say is not, "I hate you." No, it is simply, "I can no longer destroy myself trying to keep you." And after enough disappointment, something strange begins happening inside a person. They stop expecting honesty, stop expecting consistency, stop expecting emotional safety from people. Not because they became negative, but because experience taught them that human beings often protect convenience before feelings. That realization changes the way you look at the world. Especially when you spent years loving people sincerely. You begin remembering every moment you ignored your intuition just to keep someone close. Every red flag you renamed misunderstanding. Every sleepless night spent defending people who were quietly damaging your spirit. And eventually your own memories start haunting you. Not because others hurt you, but because you betrayed yourself trying to keep them. That is the part nobody talks about. The shame, the silent humiliation of realizing how many times you accepted less than you deserved just to avoid feeling abandoned. Human beings will tolerate unbelievable pain just to avoid loneliness. Sometimes they even call it love. But love should not feel like emotional survival every day. Real care does not constantly leave you confused. Real loyalty does not repeatedly make you question your worth. And real connection does not require self-destruction to maintain. Some of you became caretakers because nobody cared for you emotionally when you needed it most. So now you overcompensate. You try saving everybody, fixing everybody, understanding everybody, while secretly wishing somebody would finally notice your pain without needing an explanation first. That loneliness is unbearable. Sometimes being emotionally intelligent in rooms full of emotionally careless people is exhausting beyond words. You notice everything, every energy shift, every fake smile, every delayed reply, every cold tone hidden behind polite words. And your mind keeps trying to make sense of it all until one day, your heart becomes too tired to keep translating disrespect into excuses. That is when healing truly begins, not when you become happy. No, when you finally become honest with yourself, honest about who drains you, who manipulates your empathy, who only appears when needing emotional comfort, who enjoys receiving your warmth while offering almost nothing in return. And once you see those patterns clearly, you cannot unsee them anymore. That changes a person permanently. You stop chasing closure from people committed to misunderstanding you. Stop begging for bare minimum effort. Stop romanticizing emotional crumbs. Because emotionally mature people eventually understand something painful. Closure is not always an apology. Sometimes closure is simply seeing the truth clearly enough to stop hurting yourself willingly. And oh, that truth burns. It burns realizing some people only loved the access they had to you. Your patience, your loyalty, your softness, your constant forgiveness. But the moment you started protecting yourself, they called you difficult, cold, different. Of course they did. People become uncomfortable when they can no longer control your kindness. Listen carefully. There is nothing noble about abandoning your mental peace for people who repeatedly damage it. Nothing noble about tolerating disrespect endlessly. Nothing noble about shrinking your soul just to remain accepted. You deserve relationships where your nervous system can rest, where your presence is valued, where your silence is not punished, where your heart does not constantly feel unsafe. And if somebody only appreciates you when you are overgiving, then they never truly appreciated you at all. They appreciated access. So stop apologizing for protecting your energy. Stop feeling guilty for becoming less available, and stop betraying yourself just because you are afraid of losing people. Because some losses are actually rescues in disguise. After a certain amount of pain, you stop reacting immediately. Not because nothing hurts anymore, but because your soul became tired of proving it was wounded. You realize some people watched you suffer many times and still repeated the behavior. That changes something inside a human being permanently. Especially when you love them sincerely, you begin understanding that intentions matter less than patterns. A person can apologize beautifully and still destroy your peace repeatedly. A person can say, "I care about you," while slowly draining the life out of your spirit. And kind people, they ignore patterns too long because they see potential instead of reality. They remember good moments while tolerating unbearable treatment. That is why emotionally exhausted people often isolate themselves later in life. Not because they hate people. No. Because they became terrified of giving their heart to the wrong hands again. And honestly, can you blame them? Some souls were used so gently, they did not even notice the manipulation until years later. Slow manipulation is the worst kind. Not loud enough to expose itself immediately, just small emotional cuts over time. Small disappointments, small neglect, small disrespect, again and again and again, until your confidence weakens quietly. Your happiness fades quietly. Your personality changes quietly. And one morning you wake up feeling emotionally disconnected from yourself. That is terrifying because people always talk about heartbreak, but they rarely talk about self-loss. The horrible feeling of no longer recognizing your own energy, no longer laughing naturally, no longer feeling emotionally safe around anyone. You become careful with every word, every attachment, every expectation. Not because you enjoy distance, but because disappointment trained your nervous system to expect pain. And eventually you stop trying to convince people to value you correctly. That phase ends. You understand something deeper. People reveal their priorities through consistency, not promises, not emotional speeches, not temporary affection. Consistency. Who checks on you when you disappear? Who protects your feelings when angry? Who speaks gently when you are vulnerable? Who stays kind when there is nothing to gain from you? Those answers reveal everything. And sometimes the truth hurts because you realize how much energy you wasted trying to earn basic human decency. Some of you gave loyalty to people who only offered convenience in return. You gave depth to shallow hearts, patience to careless minds, understanding to emotionally selfish people. What a painful trade. But maybe your heart needed those lessons. Not to become cold, no, to become wiser. To finally understand that protecting your peace is part of self-respect. That not everybody deserves unlimited emotional access to you. That being available every second lowers your value in the eyes of careless people. And that sometimes silence is healthier than explaining your pain to those committed to misunderstanding it. So if your energy changed recently, if you became quieter, more distant, more protective of your emotions, do not hate yourself for it. Your soul is adapting to disappointment, adapting to survival, adapting to truths your younger heart was too innocent to understand. And maybe that sadness you carry now is not weakness. Maybe it is simply the grief of realizing how many times you abandoned yourself, trying to keep others comfortable. And the worst part about emotional exhaustion, it happens slowly. So slowly, you barely notice yourself disappearing. One day you are expressive, warm, open-hearted. The type of person who answers with excitement and loves with sincerity. Snorts, then life happens, disappointment happens, people happen. And suddenly you become quieter than before, more cautious, more emotionally distant. Not because you wanted to change, but because your nervous system became tired of recovering from the same wounds repeatedly. You know what repeated emotional pain does to a person? It teaches them to hide their needs, to pretend they are okay, to stop expecting support from others. That is why some of the strongest looking people are actually the most emotionally starved. They learned that vulnerability often attracts neglect instead of comfort. Cruel little world, isn't it? Gah. People say communicate your feelings, but many hearts tried that already and got ignored, dismissed, mocked, or treated like burdens afterward. So eventually, they stopped speaking, not because they have no emotions, because speaking stopped feeling safe. And once silence becomes safer than honesty, something inside the soul changes deeply. You stop asking for reassurance, stop asking for effort, stop asking people to care correctly. You just observe quietly. That observation phase hurts more than people realize because you begin seeing who truly values you and who only values your usefulness. Who remembers you when you are absent, who notices your sadness without needing performance, who checks on you without convenience attached to it. Snorts. And honestly, those people are rare. Very rare. Some people only love versions of you that are easy to consume. The cheerful version, the available version, the endlessly understanding version. But the moment you become emotionally tired, they disappear emotionally. That reveals everything. Real love becomes gentler when you are struggling. Fake love becomes irritated. Real care protects your nervous system. Fake care demands access to you regardless of your exhaustion. And emotionally intelligent people notice these differences eventually. That is why they become selective later in life. Not arrogant, selective because peace becomes more important than attention, more important than temporary affection, more important than being constantly surrounded by people. You begin craving sincerity more than excitement, depth more than popularity, calmness more than emotional chaos. And maybe that is maturity, realizing not every connection deserves your full emotional investment. Realizing some people are only temporary lessons disguised as attachments. Painful lessons too. Lessons that cost sleep, confidence, trust, sometimes even your personality for a while. But eventually you stop mourning people the same way. You start mourning the version of yourself that tolerated too much, the version that accepted emotional crumbs and called them love, the version that kept trying harder while being quietly neglected. That realization can break a person emotionally because you finally understand you were not difficult to love. You were simply giving your heart to emotionally careless hands. And careless hands destroy beautiful things without even noticing. So stop blaming yourself for becoming guarded. A heart that survives repeated disappointment naturally becomes more protective. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom born from pain. And one day you will understand why certain losses hurt so much. Not because those people were extraordinary, but because you kept sacrificing pieces of yourself to keep them. And losing them forced you to finally face the damage you ignored for years. Sometimes I think the kindest people are the most dangerous once they finally detach emotionally because they did not become cold overnight. No. They arrived there through disappointment, through neglect, through carrying emotions nobody helped them carry. And every silent heartbreak added another wall around their soul. That is why when a deeply patient person finally gives up, they rarely return the same way again. People mistake silence for weakness until the silence stops needing them completely. That is when panic begins. Suddenly people notice your absence. Suddenly they remember your value. Suddenly they miss the warmth they once ignored. Strange, isn't it? How some humans only appreciate light after living in darkness for a while. But by then, sometimes the heart already closed the door quietly. You know what repeated emotional pain teaches a person? How to emotionally disappear while still physically present. They smile less sincerely, talk less passionately, respond with less energy, not because they became cruel, because survival forced them to reduce emotional attachment. And honestly, many exhausted souls are not asking for much anymore. Not perfection, not endless attention, just honesty, consistency, gentleness, basic emotional safety. Yet, even those small things became rare. That is what makes modern loneliness feel so heavy. Some people have not felt emotionally understood in years. years. Imagine carrying sadness that long while pretending to function normally every day. Imagine laughing with people who have no idea how tired your soul feels. That kind of pain changes your eyes, changes your energy, changes the way you connect with the world. Eventually, you stop trying to force closeness. You stop chasing explanations. Stop begging people to communicate properly, because mature pain teaches an exhausting lesson. If somebody truly values your heart, you will not need to constantly convince them to handle it carefully. The right people do not repeatedly make you feel emotionally unsafe. They do not leave you confused every night. They do not disappear whenever responsibility appears. And once you understand that, you become calmer. Not happier immediately, but calmer. Because you stop personalizing other people's emotional immaturity. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "Why did I normalize being treated this way for so long?" That question changes everything. Because healing begins the moment self-respect becomes stronger than attachment. The moment peace becomes more important than temporary affection. The moment your fear of loneliness becomes smaller than your fear of self-betrayal. And oh, that transformation terrifies people who benefited from your old softness. The old version of you answered instantly, forgave instantly, stayed accessible endlessly. The new version observes first, protects energy first, chooses carefully. And suddenly people accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, hard to reach. Good. Some doors are supposed to become harder to open after being entered carelessly too many times. Never regret learning emotional boundaries. Never regret protecting your peace, and never feel guilty for becoming unavailable to people who only remembered your value when your warmth started disappearing. Because the deepest form of self-respect is finally refusing to set yourself on fire just to keep others emotionally comfortable. There is a specific sadness that comes from realizing you were emotionally loyal to people who were only temporarily attached to you. That realization does not break the heart immediately. It poisons it slowly. You begin remembering conversations differently, moments differently, promises differently, and suddenly everything starts making painful sense. Why you always felt anxious around them. Why your chest became heavy after certain interactions. Why you constantly felt the need to earn basic care. Because deep down your spirit already knew what your attachment refused to accept. Some people loved convenience more than connection. That is why emotionally drained people often become addicted to solitude afterward. Not because isolation feels amazing. No, because peace feels unfamiliar after years of emotional chaos. And honestly, silence becomes beautiful once you realize how exhausting forced relationships can be. No manipulation, no mixed signals, no emotional guessing games, just quiet. Do you know how tired a soul must become before loneliness starts feeling safer than attachment? Very tired. Dangerously tired. Some hearts reached a point where they no longer fear being alone. They fear being emotionally consumed again. Fear giving everything only to feel invisible afterward. Fear becoming emotionally available to people who secretly enjoy their softness but never protect it. That fear changes the way a person loves. They hesitate more, analyze more, pull away faster when disrespected, not because they became heartless, because experience taught them how expensive unguarded kindness can become. And snorts, maybe that is the cruelest lesson life teaches gentle people, that not everyone deserves access to the deepest parts of them. Some people enter your life only to consume your energy, your patience, your forgiveness, your emotional stability, then leave once you become too exhausted to continue feeding them emotionally. And the terrifying thing is people often blame themselves afterward. They sit alone replaying memories, wondering what they could have done differently. No, stop that. Sighs. You cannot heal relationships built on your constant self-sacrifice. You cannot force emotionally selfish people to suddenly value empathy. And you cannot save connections that survive only when you abandon yourself repeatedly. That truth hurts because it forces you to let go of fantasies. Fantasies that, if you loved harder, suffered quieter, waited longer, people would finally treat you correctly. But some people only learn your value through absence, only through distance, only after your energy disappears from their life completely. Funny little creatures, human beings. They ignore water until thirst begins choking them. Still, do not let pain turn you cruel. Let it turn you wise. There is a difference. Wisdom protects peace. Cruelty destroys innocence. And your softness, despite everything, is still something beautiful. It simply needs boundaries now. Strong boundaries. Because a heart without boundaries becomes public territory for emotionally careless people. Anyone enters, anyone leaves damage, anyone takes pieces of you without responsibility. But once you learn emotional discipline, everything changes. You stop over-explaining yourself. Stop chasing closure endlessly. Stop trying to rescue people committed to misunderstanding you. And slowly, your energy returns. Your sleep improves. Your mind quiets down. Your spirit breathes again. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because you finally stopped handing your peace to unstable hands. That is the moment healing truly begins. The moment your soul says, I deserve relationships that do not require constant emotional survival. And believe me, once a wounded heart finally learns that lesson deeply, it never loves recklessly the same way again. And maybe the reason you feel emotionally exhausted lately is because your soul has been fighting battles your mouth never talks about. Gah. Some pain never becomes words. It becomes insomnia, overthinking, emotional numbness. You tell people, I'm just tired, while secretly feeling disconnected from everything. That happens when a person spends too much time ignoring their own emotional wounds just to keep functioning. Especially kind people. They normalize suffering frighteningly well. They continue showing up for others while mentally collapsing. Continue giving reassurance while desperately needing reassurance themselves. Continue loving people who stopped valuing them a long time ago. And eventually their body begins carrying sadness. Their smile can no longer hide. That heavy silence, that emotional fatigue, that strange emptiness after social interaction. The soul screams quietly sometimes. You know what hurts the most? Realizing how many times you begged for bare minimum care without saying the words directly. You hoped people would notice your exhaustion, notice your silence, notice the pain hidden behind your calmness. But many people only notice what affects them personally. That truth is brutal. So one day you stop expecting emotional rescue completely. You become your own comfort, your own listener, your own safe place. And while that creates strength, it also creates loneliness because independent hearts often suffer silently. They stop reaching out, stop explaining, stop believing anyone would truly understand anyway. That is why some people suddenly disappear emotionally, not for attention, not to manipulate, but because they are trying to survive internally without collapsing publicly. Most humans see distance and assume arrogance. Very few recognize exhaustion. Some people are not becoming cold. They are becoming careful. Careful with attachment. Careful with trust. Careful with how much of themselves they give away now because emotional pain changes the nervous system of a human being. After enough disappointment, the heart stops opening automatically. You begin studying energy differently, studying tone differently, studying effort differently. You notice who disappears when you are no longer useful, who becomes irritated when you stop overgiving, who only remembers your existence when they need emotional comfort from you. And honestly, that awareness hurts. It hurts realizing how many relationships survived only because you kept sacrificing your own peace to maintain them. What an exhausting way to live. Always understanding others, always forgiving first, always carrying emotional weight nobody notices. Meanwhile, your own heart slowly starves in silence. That is why emotionally tired people become addicted to solitude sometimes. Not because they hate humans, but because peace feels safer than emotional confusion, safer than mixed signals, safer than feeling invisible around people who claim to care. And eventually, you stop forcing closeness, stop chasing explanations, stop begging people to communicate properly. Because mature pain teaches you something very important. If somebody genuinely values your heart, you will not constantly feel emotionally unsafe around them. Real care protects your nervous system. Real love does not repeatedly make you question your worth. Real loyalty does not disappear the moment you become emotionally exhausted. So, if your heart feels different now, if you became quieter, slower to trust, harder to emotionally access, do not panic. Pain changes people, but awareness rebuilds them wiser. You are not required to destroy your peace, proving your loyalty anymore. Not every relationship deserves unlimited patience. Not every person deserves endless chances. And not every goodbye is a tragedy. Sometimes distance is the first healthy decision a wounded soul has made in years. Because healing begins when self-respect finally becomes louder than emotional attachment.